Where do I start? Looking back at my career as a cameraman, I began in the early 70s as a news cameraman. And in the early 70s, we were switching from the love and peace days of the 60s into the 70s, where it was be yourself, do your thing. And in this period, doing your thing, being yourself, with some people was a very difficult time because of what was inside of them. And when they started to do their thing, people like Olson, killing kids, the murders that I covered during the 70s were quite traumatic. And we were switching from film to video for the first time. So the instant camera was a way of following the footsteps of the murderers. And when I look back at it, you really had to involve yourself in a situation to capture everything possible about the crime, just as a detective would do. So you really put yourself in the shoes of the murderer. And you were bringing television to the dinner table at 6 o'clock news and instant news and instant TV dinners, you know, the popularity of Swanson dinners, instant news. And it started to switch from information to, if it bleeds, it leads, as they say in the business, meaning that it had to be quite gruesome of a story to be part of the news. So when we started in that period, Olson was on the loose, and we were losing children in the Vancouver area. And every time a child would disappear, you ended up going to their home, interviewing the parents, and sitting down in a kitchen where parents have just lost one of their kids. So it was like the most difficult situation, but at the time, we didn't know that there was a serial killer on the loose. And Olson at the time was doing it full time. He was like 24 hours on the move, looking for opportunities, doing his thing. What was inside of him was anger, frustration, and for him to be satisfied, it meant he had to take it to the nth degree. So this period was a very difficult period as a news cameraman, growing up in a society in the Maritimes where life was very simple, to this crime scene where you were running from Vancouver to Seattle to cover the worst crimes possible. And in Seattle at the time, they captured Bundy, the serial killer, and we went down to Seattle to investigate that, and we ended up having to sit down and air 3 hours of tape, black and white tape, that was made with Bundy, who had these personality changes and multiple personalities. So we had to sit down and listen to these interviews. And what was amazing was watching this man manipulate the police with his personalities. And I guess when you're a killer of that level and you're getting away with it, you're putting a lot of effort into it and a lot of thought. And he was, I think he graduated from university, and he actually went after a lot of women who were in the university and had a certain look. He was after these women with a certain look. So looking back at it all and thinking of throwing myself into this area and looking at crime was very devastating. But where I got my balance was, on the weekends we had property in the Gulf Islands, and I would head to the ocean. And it was here at the ocean that I realized Mother Nature has a way of cleansing and bringing back the truth of life. And in nature doesn't lie. So I spent a lot of my weekends with my family, running off to our cabin putting the kids in a boat during the 70s and rowing out to a small island off of the bay. And it was just here that you were alone with your family and with nature and with the eagles and the whales. And it was just a period where in the big cities it was a jungle. The crime that was going on at the time, you'd come back to town and back into the business on Monday morning, and ended up covering a murder case where a young man in his 20s who had taken acid that night and gathered his family up and then shot them all one by one. And there was like 5 members of the family, his sister and his sister's husband, the mother, father, and another sister, I think it was 6 people. But you'd end up going to the home after the crime, standing outside, waiting for each body bag to be delivered, to come out. And that was the news, was that body bag, and there was X amount killed. You had to have those body bag shots of that white body bag passing the camera into the coroner's wagon, and off it would go. So you would stand outside, and after the crime, and it would take the detectives hours before they would be finalized with the crime, so that you would probably spend maybe 4 or 5 hours waiting for the bodies to come out. But in the meantime, you would get the police coming out and making comments, not on camera, but off camera, about what the scene was like. And a lot of these people were in shock at the time because they were witnessing something on the inside that was much more traumatic than me on the outside. And they would say some of the weirdest things. I was always amazed but how people in shock from a scene, that the shock actually must protect themselves from doing themselves damage or having that scene repeat itself the rest of its life. So the system is protective of the scene in a way. So these cops would be in shock or in trauma state, and they would say the most absurd facts about the case on the inside, and sometimes jokingly or makes fun of the case. So it was kind of bizarre just waiting around, waiting for the body bag. But then another murder in the parks in Willsgrave Park, where a young man waited in the bushes at a park that was once a prison camp for sex offenders. And his father was the warden of the camp that in those days sex offenders were sent off to the woods for a couple of weeks to take 2 on that. These sex offenders were sent off to work camps in the woods. So obviously this young man was playing his childhood with these sex offenders, and they must have been abusing him, and he had this frustration of abuse inside of him that he acted out in a most peculiar way, where he shot the grandparents and the parents, and then he took the 2 kids up the mountain, and what he did to them I don't know, but then he put the kids in the car, put the car on fire, and put the car over the mountain. And what was amazing about this case was the hearing in town about how this guy would go drinking and get up and start screaming in the bar, and realizing that within these abused kids, you start to realize how mostly males